Today we're going to talk about musical form. Now in the textbook this is only 4 pages in this chapter, but it's an important thing. As we go through the semester and study the different compositions, we will be referring to the musical form, the architecture that the composers built into the music. So 2 of the main forces in musical design are the aspect of repetition, where you repeat some music that has already been heard by the listener, and contrast, where the composer brings in new musical material that has not yet been heard. So the most interesting music uses both of those things. Some repetition to bring a familiarity to the listener, some comfort level to the listener because they're hearing something they've heard before, and also contrast brings in new interesting material into the music. 2 of the main types of musical form are a 2-part form, which we call binary form, and a 3-part form, which we can call ternary form. Now, throughout the semester, we'll be referring to large chunks of music that are more or less self-contained by letter names, like section A of music, and then a different sounding part of the music would be section B. And it can go on to section D, C, E, all those things. But for now, we'll keep it simple and just use A and B. Coming up are going to be some sound examples where you can hear this in action, that the first part of a song would be letter A. When they switch to something noticeably different, it'll be letter B. Now here are 2 examples of binary form. First, the popular folk song from England, Green Sleeves. Most people have probably heard this before. So watch the slider as the music plays, and when it gets to letter B, notice how the music really does sound different. It's got different elements going on, different melody, and other things. All right, did you hear how the Green Sleeve song changed when it got to letter B? Here's another example of binary form. This one's not quite as obvious, but it's from the great composer Johann Sebastian Bach. The sound that you're hearing is the sound of the harpsichord, which was the most popular keyboard instrument back in the day before the piano became popular. So you'll be hearing lots of harpsichord as we go through the course, so it's good to know what this is. When the slider gets to letter B, notice that the melody moves to higher notes and definitely sounds a little bit different. So see if you can pick up how it changes at letter B. Next, we have some nice examples where you're going to be able to hear ternary form, 3-part form. So as you can see here, the music starts with an A section, then moves into a B section, which will sound different to you, and then finally returning to the A section, which is a repeat of the musical material you heard at the beginning. Now this first one is an old hymn from the Shaker religion called Simple Gifts. This is kind of interesting because later on in the course you'll hear this same melody used in Aaron Copland's Appalachian Spring. It's a very famous piece of music. But in section A here, notice that the rhythm of the singing is fairly quick. When you get to section B, the speed of the singing phrases broadens out and gives us more long notes. It seems like it slows down a little bit at letter B. Let's listen.
'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be, and when we find ourselves in a place just right, we'll be in the valley of love and delight, when true simplicity is deep, to bow and to bend we will not be ashamed, to turn with
Now in a song that has lyrics, such as the Simple Gifts song, another indication that you've arrived at a different section of the tune is when the words change. So there was a whole different set of words in the B section of Simple Gifts. When we arrived at the next occurrence of letter A, it eventually got back to the same lyrics that you had at the very beginning. Next up, we're going to look at an instrumental track by the famous Russian composer Tchaikovsky from the Nutcracker Suite. A lot of people know this music. And you'll hear an instrumental section of what we'll call A, section A, a short section B, and notice when it gets to section B, the spotlight turns over to the flutes, which do some very fast, very fancy flute work for a little while, and then we're back to the same melodies you heard at the beginning, in other words, section A. Did you hear how the character of the music really changed at letter B of that Tchaikovsky excerpt? It went from a march-like feel of 1 and 2 and dun 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 into a completely different thing at letter B. Very, very different. So you can listen for changes of musical character as indications that you've arrived at a different part of the musical form. And this all has to do with musical architecture. It's the way that composers put their musical structures together in order to make cohesive and interesting work for the listener. Next, let's look at what a theme is, a musical theme. As it says here, theme can be used as a building block in music. There are compositions that are known as theme and variation forms, where a theme is introduced, a melody is introduced, and then the composer proceeds to write a series of variations based on that original theme. So a lot of those compositions exist. And if we break down a theme even further, put it under the microscope, we come up with a motive. And that, as it says here, that's the smallest fragment of a theme that forms a melodic unit. So the smallest cohesive melodic unit that can be used. And then composers can play with these motifs, transpose them to different pitch starting points, higher, lower, and we'll hear an example of that here by the English composer Purcell. This is a piece of his called the Rondo, and as this moves into it, it's an instrumental piece of music. Listen for the quick 4-note patterns. There's a lot of this type stuff going on. 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, starting on different pitch positions, high, low, medium, but he really works that into this piece here. I think you'll hear it. Da 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 da. Listen for that. Next, we have another example of theme and variation. Very simple, short example here. You're going to hear a classical trumpet player playing Pop Goes the Weasel, of all things. And then when it gets to the variation section, you'll hear a more elaborate version of that melody with a lot of variation and ornamentation built into it. So take a quick listen to this, please. So you could still hear the reference to the original Pop Goes the Weasel melody, right? It just so happened that on the variation section there were a lot more connecting notes written in to the melody, just fancier overall, but still a connection to the original theme. Next, we're going to look at an example of call and response. This is very common in music. It can be instrumental, one group of instruments responding to a solo instrument or a separate, different group of instruments. The easiest way to point this out is through gospel music, though. And in this video example, you'll see the lead singer singing a phrase and immediately being responded to by the rest of the choir, the rest of the congregation.
Lord, one day I was walking along. I heard a voice, but I saw no one. The voice I heard, it sounds so sweet. I know it was Jesus talking to me. Oh, soon I recognized his voice. Lord, the way I make my choice.
So that was a very clear demonstration of call and response in music. The lead singer throws out a line. Immediately the other singers respond with like an echo of that. And next we're going to move on to the idea of an ostinato. Ostinato is another building block in music. It's a relatively short repeating musical phrase. It's often in the bass or the low note section, and that can provide a framework or a foundation for building an entire composition on top of it. A great example of that is the famous Pachelbel Canon in D. This is a piece of music that a lot of people choose to have played during their wedding ceremonies, and it features a ostinato played by the cello, the low stringed instrument, and you'll see that in this next demonstration. Think of an ostinato as a loop, and that ostinato keeps looping around time and time again, over and over, as the higher instruments, in this case the violins, build new melodies on top of it. This demonstration will be clear, I think. So you could hear and see that that entire composition was built around the foundation of that repeating low note ostinato. And the poor cello player just has to keep playing the same notes over and over and over. But it contributes towards the excellence of the entire composition. And as the piece progressed, you could see that the violins played more ornate and fancy things. And it got very sophisticated, but still it was grounded by that ostinato. So that'll conclude our discussion of form today. These things should help you as we go through the course. We on the music faculty feel that even our general ed students should have an awareness of musical form, not so much musical theory, but it really will enhance your enjoyment of these classical pieces of music when you have a sense of where the form of the music is and which sections of the music you're encountering as you're listening.